Violence is a huge issue in America. And as we focus on Open Heart Closed Case Night on some of the most uh, tangibly critical issues facing America regarding public health and public safety, we have a great representative tonight with us from Stop Abuse in Violent Environments. He is none other than the president of the organization himself, Dr. Everett Bartlett. And tonight, we're going to talk about a very tough matter. It's ending domestic violence. Dr. Bartlett, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Pleasure to see you, Ken. How are you doing today?
Doing extremely well. It's good to see you, sir. Unfortunately, we're here on a very tough subject matter tonight, and this is not a very sexy topic. Um, it's a very excruciating one. It is the subject matter of domestic violence. And so, Dr. Bartlett, first and foremost, can you tell everybody about SAVE, Stop Abuse in Violent Environments?
Sure, be happy to, Ken. So, SAVE is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization working to end domestic violence. And we want to see domestic violence to policies to be evidence based and science based, which is in sharp contrast to the existing laws and policies that are based on ideology. And that ideology claims that domestic violence is all about power and control, and that ideology also says that this is all about patriarchal control. Well, um, as I'm going to explain to you a little bit as we go along, it
Yes.
turns out that women are just as likely to engage in domestic violence as men. So
No.
right there, the ideological uh, foundations are are not supported by the facts.
Doctor, I'm already shocked this evening. How we're talking sweet, innocent women. How could they possibly even conceive the thing? We are evil men and terrible patriarchs, and we are the cause of all the domestic violence, right?
Well, that's you've reiterated the narrative perfectly, Ken. I mean, you've said it so well, but uh, there there have literally been hundreds of studies going back to the 1980s that
Whoa.
over and over and over again show the same result. This is an equal opportunity problem. Some studies actually show women were more likely to be the perpetrators. And just a couple days ago, there was a homicide here in Washington, D.C., where a black man was killed by his former girlfriend. So this stuff is happening as we're discussing the issue.
Dr. Bartlett, there are people who have defined abuse in this particular fashion. It's Friday night, it's 6 o'clock, and you know for a fact that your husband's coming home boozing, he's drunk, he's taking a couple of slaps on you. That's what we define as domestic violence, and individuals then are prosecuted first with an arrest and then later on prosecuted and go to jail. How much does real life align with that perspective that we've been hearing over the years?
Well, there's many scenarios of domestic violence. You've described one of those many scenarios. Um, an equally common scenario is mom or the girlfriend, for whatever reason. It could be she's dealing with her own mental health issues. It could be that she was abused as a child, and she's still in that what's called the cycle of violence. And so maybe something at her job or something with the kids triggers her, and and she hits the guy. In the case I just described, it was a homicide.
Yes.
So, yeah, and I'll actually give you another example, Ken.
Yes.
that's even more common than these two is what's called mutual abuse, um, where the woman slaps the guy and he shoves her back, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's mutual abuse. And actually, about half of all domestic violence cases involve mutual abuse. So again, this narrative of patriarchal control doesn't really hold up when you look at these actual real life cases.
Now, Doctor, there are those who are watching tonight who say um, that it is the role of the police to stop domestic violence, and the police uh, are somewhat abusive in that regard. They don't regard the law as greatly. Um, is that the role of the police in this particular case to take advantage? Well, forgive me, not take advantage, but to actually stop domestic violence? Is it their role?
So yeah, Ken. So we're wading now into one of the really hotly debated issues in domestic violence. So if we're talking about serious life-threatening situations, the answer is absolutely yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, um, but the great majority of domestic violence cases are not in that, don't fall in that category of being, somebody, threatening with a gun or something that's life threatening. At a much lower level.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually one of the big debates right now is let's go back to that scenario I just gave you. The woman
Yes.
slaps the guy and he shoves her back. So all right, so the neighbors hear this, and so they call 911. The police show up. Okay, so do we want the police to arrest both of them? Well, I guess that's possible, and that has actually been done in some cases. But
Yeah.
there's a growing sense that rather than throwing people in jail for a one-time slap and a one-time shove, doesn't it make sense that we think of this as more of a mental health issue?
Mm.
So get whether it's anger management or whether it's employment training or whether it's couples counseling. There's a lot of different approaches. Doesn't it make sense, and it does to me, that we would, for these lower level, especially one-time situations, that we would use a mental health approach rather than just throwing everybody in jail, because it's especially low income African American couples that are especially harmed, because when one of them is thrown, either or both of them are thrown in jail, hey, we've got a police record that's
Yes.
going to affect that person's employability.
Wow. Now, good doctor, Everett Bartlett with us tonight from SAVE, Stop Abuse in Violent Environments. Um, in listening to you regarding that scenario and situation, the police come in uh, and they're trying to stop the abusive situation and control the environment. You don't have a social worker with these particular police officers, and many police officers do not believe that social workers at 3 o'clock in the morning are going to be the ones that people are going to listen to in those particular situations. What say you, sir? Should social workers be the ride-alongs for domestic violence situations in America?
So that's probably that's probably not a practical solution, even though um, some people are talking about that.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think it's, I mean, we have to think about these issues in a practical sense. And I just don't think it's going to be practical to have a social worker in the car for every 911 domestic violence call. But the police officer on the spot can certainly separate the parties into separate residences as an immediate step, and then require that, depending on the assessment of the situation, that either or both of the parties uh, uh, get evaluation assessment so the situation doesn't reoccur.
No, there, doctor. There are some people who would say, "Well, listen, you're the kind of guy who's going to just bog up the courts. We already have enough court cases. What you're talking about doing is sending these people, firstly, reprimanding them to separate homes. Then you're going to make certain that they go to court, and that's going to eat up time in their lives and their families. And there's no special court in the criminal justice system that deals with these particular issues. This is all criminal, right?
Yeah, well, so in this, let's take the slap and the shove scenario. In my view, that doesn't need to go to court.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to go directly to the mental health system. Um, Now let's take this homicide that occurred a
Yes.
couple days ago in Southeast Washington. So of course that's the far opposite extreme of the situation. That is a felony crime. Okay,
Yes.
that needs to be addressed through the criminal justice system. But then there's a lot of cases in between those two extremes. So in a lot of jurisdictions, they've set up what are called diversion programs.
Ah.
You've probably heard of these because they're being used a lot for drug treatment and for mental health. So there's also a number of places around the country that have domestic violence diversion programs. And I'll tell you, quickly how it works. It
Mm-hmm.
requires the defendant to admit guilt to the incident, to the crime. That person is then, instead of being sentenced, is agrees to attend like a 6 month substance abuse treatment program. At the end of that 6 months, comes back to court, and if the person has successfully completed the drug treatment, then that guilty plea is vacated, or in other words, that person's criminal record is becomes clean, and the person could go back to their life, get a job, and learn from that bad experience. That is being used with success in many places around the country.
Now, are there contributing factors to domestic violence? Is it the working guy? Is it the working woman? Is it the homebody? Is a certain characteristic of a person who will participate in domestic violence?
Well, yes, there definitely are, Ken, and I'll share those with you. First of all, I'll say that again, it's not this power and control ideology, even though that's what's repeated over and over again
Mm-hmm.
on the airwaves. So the most commonly found causes of domestic violence incidents are substance abuse, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mental health problems, and marital disruption or marital breakup. When
Mm-hmm.
if a couple is going through a breakup, the risk of domestic violence is much higher than a person in a steady, um, committed relationship. So anyway, but again, those three scenarios are all appropriately treated through the mental health system. Couples counseling often is effective. Alcohol treatment often can work. Mental health treatment can be very effective. So yeah, so those approaches are vastly underutilized. The irony, perhaps the greatest irony, is that in the federal law known as the Violence Against Women Act,
Yes.
um, any guesses how many times it mentions even the words alcohol treatment, marital disruption, or mental health issues?
Uh, I would think it would be a whole lot, doctor.
You would think so. Well, if I told you zero, that's
Seriously.
seriously, there's zero mention of those concepts or anything related to it. It's just it again. It speaks to the ideology that's driving this federal law.
Okay, who put that crap together? Forgive my French, but who put that crap together? I mean, you and I both know in Washington D.C. On a night like this, there are going to be at least 10 to 15, maybe even 20 domestic violence issues before 1 a.m. And that's on a good night. Who put that law together where they don't mention the subsequent characteristics that contribute to uh,
Yeah.
this particular matter?
Yeah. Well, so our the champion of the Violence Against Women Act was none other than former Senator Joseph Biden. When he was senator, he is the person who shepherded this, who pushed this through the Senate and found people in the House. So, uh, you know, Joe Biden, he was the guy.
So, what needs to happen? Well, before I get into that, I don't want to go too far in terms of that, because I got another question here regarding the sense of domestic violence. There are people who say Samantha and Joe have been together for 3 or 4 years. Uh, and this is the first time we have never heard of Samantha slapping Joe or Joe pushing Samantha back. I am completely and totally amazed after all these years that this happens. Is that true, sir? Does domestic violence just all of a sudden pop up in a family?
I mean, again, there's so many scenarios it can.
Hmm.
Um, I'll tell you, one of my former employees was a former prosecutor in Baltimore, and she handled domestic violence cases. Um, and she told me over and over again how, you know, the police had been called. They came in, they arrested one of them. Now they're showing up in court, and guess what? The couple are sitting there holding hands
Yes.
in the court, right?
Hmm.
That was not unusual for my former employee to have that happen.
So how do you? Okay, it is incomprehensible. Someone's gotten you into this particular situation, or you've gotten yourself into this. How is it that love is so strong that they cover up those particular issues and then go back into the home and do the same thing over again? Doesn't that exhaust the judicial system and the police from even wanting to get involved?
Well, that's exactly the point, Ken, is that we have tended to, I'll use the term, over criminalize domestic violence incidents, especially the minor one time incidents. Um, and yeah, we've plugged up our courts, we've filled our jails, we've broken up families, we've hobbled the career prospects of low income uh, uh, African American. I mean, we've done so much harm in the name of trying to do good. It's it's pretty
Yeah,
astonishing.
it is. I've always said, and maybe it's just not me, that if a woman has been involved in domestic violence, that she should be required to take self-defense courses. Is that something that should be considered, or should it be both ways?
Well, it definitely should be both ways. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the myths is that because the guy tends to be stronger, sort of the myth is, oh, but that that means that he's not at risk of domestic violence. Well, there's another piece to that is guys are often told, thou shalt not ever lay a hand on your woman, right?
Amen. Amen.
So you've heard that 100 times. I've heard it a hundred times. So yeah, maybe the guy is bigger and stronger, but he also has this. He's been told a thousand times, "Thou shalt not lay a hand on your woman." So that's a big factor.
Doctor, are you trying to say that women sometimes take advantage of the fact that psychologically men have been trained not in any regard to defend himself against a woman? Are you trying to insinuate that, sir?
I'm not just insinuating. I will say that absolutely that happens sometimes.
Doctor, there are those who are watching at home tonight and they're thinking to themselves, um, I've been in this situation before. I'm in the process of using drugs, alcoholism is quite prevalent in my life. What is the likelihood of me eventually entering into a domestic violence situation because I do use drugs and I do overdrink, or I have other addiction issues like gambling and so on?
Yeah, I don't know about the gambling part, but certainly alcohol drug abuse is clearly related. I think the number I've seen is something like 60% of all domestic violence incidents are involve substance abuse. So that's a pretty big risk factor.
Yeah. So if someone is actually using illicit drugs of any type, should there be an intervention of some type, and how does that intervention takes place so that there is not a potential domestic violence issue in the home?
Yeah, well, obviously, get help before there's an incident so you don't have to go through a court ordered diversion program.
Yeah.
It's just much easier all around to get help on the front end rather than after an incident occurs.
Now, you have been successful in California along with many others in terms of the last election with the um, disdain for the affirmative action bill. Can you tell us what happened with the affirmative action bill out in California, sir?
Yeah, sure, Ken. Yeah, a lot of things happened on November 3rd. It wasn't just uh, Joe Biden versus uh, President Trump. There was it was called Proposition. I want to get the right number. It was a proposition. There was Proposition 16 that said that it would be okay for universities and government to discriminate on the basis of sex and race.
Mm,
And and ironically, the group that really opposed this and really led the efforts against this idea were Asian Americans. The Asian Americans in California who have been, I mean, they are clearly a minority,
yes.
right? But they're a minority that actually has done well, and so they find that they have been on the receiving end of the reverse discrimination policies over the
Yeah.
years. So the Asian Americans said, really organized and put in a lot of money, and ultimately California, which is of course is ultra liberal,
Yes.
defeated this referendum, 56 to 44%. That's a
Wow.
pretty resounding numbers. California is one of the most liberal states in the country. Nobody will dispute that.
Yeah.
And so that really is pretty earth shattering.
Now, why is it so important that affirmative action be disbanded in conversation regarding domestic violence, in terms of sex, in terms of race? Are there certain discriminating principles that would become prevalent in dealing with domestic violence in that regard?
Yeah, well, exactly. And I previously mentioned the Violence Against Women Act. So right there, we see this preferential treatment for female victims,
Hmm.
and it's really not just preferential. It's like if you're a male victim, it's really hard to get help,
Yeah.
and you may find yourself actually being accused of committing the crime of which you are actually the victim.
Hmm.
So, yeah, the Violence Against Women Act is just a perfect example of an affirmative action policy that is now uh, controlled by a radical feminist group called the National Task Force
Mm.
(NTF), and they really call the shots in Congress as far as the reauthorizations of this bill every 5 years.
Now, you mentioned that it's a reauthorization of the bill every 5 years. Dr. Edward Bartlett with us tonight from SAVE. In, in the coming years, what should whether you're a GOP or a Democrat Marxist, what should both groups do to improve the Violence Protection Act?
Well, yeah, that's I think the $94,000 question is exactly that. And right now, VAWA is up for reauthorization, um, and we can talk about sort of the ins and outs of that if you want. But bottom
Yes.
line is, um, the the Democrats would like to radically expand the definition of domestic violence. Now, you and I think of this as something physical.
Yeah.
Well, uh, Democrats want to radically expand the definition of domestic violence to include, and hold on to your hat when I say this, to include psychological abuse, technological abuse,
Technolo-
and financial abuse.
Tell me
So,
about the What is the technological abuse thing? How does this?
so So if your partner was to send you two or three text messages that were annoying or controlling, or telling you, hey, here's your honey do list, and you were found that irritating, you would be a victim of technological abuse.
Oh,
I'm not exaggerating one bit.
oh, I mean, anytime I send a message to my wife, it's annoying. So, so I'm going. Yeah, so psychological, technological, uh, physical
Financial,
abuse, and now you say
right?
financial abuse.
Right.
And in this pandemic, who isn't broke? How does that work? Two people in a relationship, and there is financial abuse. How does that work?
So financial abuse would be sort of, if you were to tell your wife, "Hey, honey, don't bounce any more checks. Don't overspend the credit card." Um, and if your wife viewed that as a controlling move on your part, you would be a perpetrator of domestic violence. Again, I am not exaggerating.
Uh, Now, wow. Okay, that is an extreme level. What options have the GOP offered regarding this particular issue of reauthorization? Are they trying to make it more stringently um, clean cut in terms of just physical abuse?
Um, so, of course, in the House, this bill did pass in the House last April.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty much a party line vote. So almost every Democrat voted for this. Almost every Republican voted against it. So now the battle is in the Senate. So the bill that Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein introduced was essentially identical to the House bill, right? No
Yes,
surprise there.
exactly.
So then the Republican is Senator Joni Ernst. She has reined back somewhat, but we'd like to see her go a lot farther.
Yeah. Should Joni not only go back to the original concept of what domestic violence is, but should she also add provisions for diversion court, substance abuse treatment, and alcoholism, which contribute to uh, real domestic violence?
Absolutely, that's exactly how we'd like to see this whole this whole law go in that direction. We'd like it to be less based on ideology, feminist ideology, and more based on science.
Well, it's not just the whole idea of feminism because it's also a Marxist pursuit under Black Lives Matter to eliminate the male in the household. And so that particular proposal by Feinstein fits exactly what would be caused of support from Kamala Harris and others. I got to ask you here because people will say, Ken, you've been doing this interview and you never once mentioned children. What is the impact of domestic violence on children?
So it is an important impact, Ken, and it's true. So a child who witnesses domestic violence is impacted by it, is harmed, um, and yes, this is an important issue. That's it's fairly well recognized that witnessing domestic violence is harmful.
So, are there any provisions in the bill that would reach out for counseling for children and meeting their needs, or would that just open the door for abuse by legislators to include other constructs which are unnecessary and confining to the parent?
So yeah, that's not really addressed. I mean, there is a section in VAWA on uh, uh, youth and children, but that focus is really more on like dating violence, right?
Yes.
I
Mm-hmm.
think you're talking about, like young children. I don't believe that's addressed at all anywhere in the Violence Against Women Act.
How can people support what you do, Dr. Bartlett? They're watching now. They know that the myths exist. The legends are virulent. People know that women can do it just as well as men. In fact, maybe more so because of the psychological tendency of men to not hit a woman because they've been told culturally over the years not to do so by their fathers and by their mothers. Um, what exactly should be the next steps of the person who's watching this particular interview in terms of involving themselves in making change in America?
So thanks for asking that question, Ken. So yeah, we actually have we've set up a new um, uh, partner organization. It's called Coalition to End Domestic Violence,
Mhm.
and I'll give you the URL of our website. It's end to as in TODV as in domestic violence.org again. So it's end to dv.org. So there's lots of information, lots of resources there. Check it out.
Dr. Bartlett, thank you so much for being with us tonight. How can people get in contact with you, and how can they organize themselves to in mobilization of support of changes to the Violence Protection Act?
So our email address is info, at end2dv.org. Again, info at end2dv.org.
Dr. Bartlett, thank you for all that you do with SAVE. It is an organization that not only helps in domestic violence issues, but as well those who have been falsely accused of sexual assault. You all have been on the battlegrounds. You all have done tremendous work, and we'll continue to have you on TECNTV.com to talk about your efforts. God bless you, sir. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Ken. Blessings to you as well.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Edward Bartlett. What a tremendous joy to have the president of SAVE on tonight. Domestic violence is a serious issue. When we come back, I'll give you some of the statistics that go along with that. And in addition to that, encourage you to go to N2DV. We'll be right back with more of the best right after this.